March 5, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The gray waters of the Atlantic stretched cold and merciless as the first American hunter-killer group prepared to sail. Captain Giles Short, commanding officer of the escort carrier USS Bogue, studied an encrypted message from the 10th Fleet. Ultra-intelligence had broken German naval codes, revealing the exact coordinates of U-boat refueling rendezvous points in the mid-Atlantic. The message named them clearly: milk cow submarines U-459 and U-487, scheduled to resupply wolfpacks along vital convoy routes. An operations officer lifted the secure phone. Orders were short and absolute. One escort carrier, supported by 4 destroyer escorts, would hunt the hunters. The group's composition: USS Bogue, USS Belknap, USS Georgie Badger, USS Osmond Ingram, and USS Clemson. None aboard could imagine that this single mission would trigger the most dramatic reversal in submarine warfare history. Within 8 months, American hunter-killer groups would crush the myth of U-boat invincibility and force Admiral Karl Donitz to withdraw his entire submarine fleet from the Atlantic. For years, the Battle of the Atlantic had been a brutal equation, measured not in victories but in tonnage. Sink more shipping than the enemy could build, and victory was inevitable. Lose more submarines than could be replaced, and defeat was only a matter of time. Through 1942 and into early 1943, the math favored Germany. Wolfpacks roamed at will, sinking Allied ships faster than American and British shipyards could launch replacements. By March 1943, U-boats were at their peak. Over 80 Allied ships had gone down that month, nearly 500,000 tons lost. April was even worse, with 600,000 tons sunk in 30 days. Admiral Donitz commanded over 400 submarines from his headquarters at Lorient, France. His wolfpack tactics had nearly severed the lifeline between America and Britain. Convoys HX-229 and SC-121 had been mauled. Winston Churchill would later confess that the U-boat peril was the only thing that really frightened me during the war. The USS Bogue displaced 9,800 tons and carried 890 men. Her wooden flight deck stretched nearly 500 feet, launching 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 TBF Avenger bombers. But her true power lay in unseen technologies. A new centimetric radar invisible to German detectors and high-frequency direction-finding gear, Huff Duff, that could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions with deadly precision. And inside, her Avengers lay a secret weapon known officially as the Mark 24 mine, a disguise meant to conceal its real identity, the world's first operational acoustic homing torpedo. The hunter-killer concept marked a revolution in anti-submarine warfare. Convoy escorts could only defend, torn between protecting merchantmen and chasing attackers. The hunter-killer groups were different. They had no cargo to guard, only a single mission: to seek and destroy submarines wherever they hid. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery, soon to command Composite Squadron 9 aboard Bogue, understood the change. A veteran of Atlantic convoys, he knew U-boats were most vulnerable during 3 moments: when surfacing to recharge batteries, when meeting supply subs for refueling, and when transmitting radio reports to headquarters. And Donitz's submarines transmitted constantly: daily position updates, weather reports, contact sightings, and damage assessments. Each signal was a beacon to Allied direction-finding stations. North Atlantic, May 1943. Aboard U-569, Captain Lieutenant Hans Johansson read his orders. 7 weeks at sea had left fuel dangerously low. Radio instructions directed him to rendezvous with supply sub U-459 at 50 to 40 D north, 35 to 21 mile west. U-569, a Type 7C, was the workhorse of the German submarine arm, 769 tons surfaced, 871 submerged. She carried 14 torpedoes and a crew of 44 men. Her record: 1 ship sunk, another damaged, a modest tally reflecting the growing power of Allied defenses. But the submarine's ancient weakness had never changed. Diesel engines required air. Batteries needed hours on the surface to recharge. At economical speed, she could stay submerged 18 hours. But high-speed evasion drained batteries in less than 1. The Americans exploited these vulnerabilities with mathematical precision. Search patterns were plotted to blanket the sea with radar coverage. Aircraft patrols were timed to strike during daylight surfacing periods, each attack designed to keep submarines under pressure until exhaustion forced them up. At 14:20 hours, on May 22, 1943, Lieutenant William Chamberlain, piloting a TBF Avenger from Bogue, detected a radar contact, range 18 miles, bearing 090 degree. He pushed his control stick forward, descending for attack. Below him, U-569 churned across the surface at 15 knots, diesels roaring as her batteries drank current. The bridge watch sighted the approaching aircraft, and the alarm bell shrieked. "Alarm! Alarm! Crash dive!" Within seconds, vents opened, diesels cut, and the boat angled sharply down. In a Type 7, the dive from surface to periscope depth took 35 seconds. But Chamberlain's depth charges detonated before she reached safety. 4 Mark 17 charges, set for shallow depth, ripped through her hull, crippling vital systems and forcing her back to the surface. Another Avenger, flown by Lieutenant Howard Roberts, arrived as the submarine broke through the waves. He lined up for another run, but held his fire when he saw white flags rising from the periscope shears. The crew was surrendering. The Canadian destroyer HMCS St. Laurent was vectored to the scene, but before she arrived, Johansen ordered his men to scuttle their vessel. Explosive charges rocked the boat, and she slipped beneath the Atlantic. 25 of her crew were rescued. 19 went down with their ship. Interrogations at sea revealed the scale of Allied success. Captured submariners spoke in disbelief. "They knew exactly where we were," one said, as if they could see through the ocean itself. The truth was even more devastating. Ultra-intelligence had cracked the entire German naval grid system. Every patrol area, every wolfpack, every refueling point. No U-boat at sea was safe. On June 5, 1943, aircraft from Bogue sighted U-217 recharging batteries 450 miles west of the Azores. Captain Lieutenant Kurt Reichenbach-Klinker had 3 kills to his name, totaling over 10,000 tons. But as his crew scrambled to dive, Avengers struck first. The initial depth charge pattern damaged the diving planes, leaving the submarine stranded on the surface. Reichenbach-Klinker ordered his deck gunners to open fire. For 18 minutes, the duel raged across the heaving swells. The U-boat's 88mm gun roared, its 20mm flak weapons spewing tracers. A Wildcat was hit by shell fragments, but stayed airborne. Then a second Avenger swooped in, dropping depth charges that perfectly bracketed the sub. The pressure hull collapsed, the boat shattered, and 50 men disappeared beneath the Atlantic without survivors. That sinking broke more than steel. It broke morale. German radio intercepts revealed spreading fear. Commanders spoke of American wonder weapons, of aircraft that appeared from nowhere, and torpedoes that hunted like ghosts. Crews hesitated to surface, even when their batteries died. Admiral Dunitz tried to adapt. He ordered his boats to cross the Bay of Biscay submerged, no matter the battery strain. Refueling operations were restricted to darkness. Radio messages were reduced to the bare minimum. Yet these measures only delayed the inevitable. The Americans now possessed a deadly combination of intelligence, technology, and relentless coordination that tactics alone could not defeat. By June 1943, 5 hunter-killer groups roamed the Atlantic, each built around an escort carrier and its destroyer escorts. USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Kor, USS Santee, and USS Croatan, floating symbols of an industrial power Germany could never match. Captain Arnold Buster Eisbel's USS Card would soon become the most lethal of them all. Between July and October 1943, Card's group destroyed 8 U-boats, earning the first presidential unit citation ever awarded to a hunter-killer group. Their methods became doctrine for the Navy, expanding air patrol boxes, radar contact strikes, and surface ships closing for the kill with hedgehogs and depth charges. On August 7, 1943, Card's Avengers found supply submarine U-117 refueling U-66 on the surface. The milk cow never had a chance. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked while fuel hoses were still connected, dropping 4 depth charges. The resulting explosion, 400 tons of diesel erupting, lit the ocean for miles. U-66 escaped, damaged but alive, doomed to die months later in one of the war's strangest duels. Below periscope depth, another witness watched the inferno, Captain Lieutenant Klaus Barkston of U-521. His war diary captured the despair of Donitz's elite. The Americans are everywhere. Their planes arrive without warning. Their weapons are impossibly accurate. We are no longer the hunters. We are the hunted. By October 1943, the balance of power in the Atlantic had shifted forever. 23 U-boats were lost that month alone. Veteran captains who had survived since 1939 vanished beneath the waves. Germany's once proud gray wolves were being exterminated by a new kind of warfare, one fought not by instinct, but by system. October 23, 1943, mid-Atlantic 0500 hours, dawn rose over a gray and restless ocean. The men of USS Card's hunter-killer group stood at battle stations. Radar had picked up a faint surface contact 20 miles ahead, closing fast. Lieutenant J.G. Allen Smith, flying an Avenger bomber, banked his aircraft toward the signal. Moments later, the black silhouette of a U-boat appeared through the low clouds. Its crew, unaware of the approaching threat, was transmitting a report to Lorient. Smith dived to 200 feet. The U-boat, now alerted, fired its 20mm flak gun, tracers arcing toward the Avenger. Smith's bombardier released 4 depth charges in a tight diamond pattern. They detonated alongside the hull with a concussion that sent geysers of water into the morning light. Seconds later, oil and debris surfaced. U-402, once a proud member of Wolfpack Sturmer, was gone with all hands. The Battle of the Atlantic had entered its decisive phase. In just 6 months, the U-boat arm had suffered losses on a scale that defied belief. 41 submarines were destroyed in May 1943 alone. Over 100 in the next 4 months. Crews were vanishing faster than they could be trained, and for the first time the hunters could no longer hide. The Allies had found their rhythm, technology and tactics working in seamless orchestration. Long-range patrols closed the mid-Atlantic gap. Centimetric radar spotted periscopes at night. Direction-finding towers along Newfoundland, Iceland, and the Azores triangulated radio signals to within a few miles. And in the air, a new kind of weapon prowled the skies, the acoustic homing torpedo. The Americans called it the Fido, officially designated Mine Mark 24. It was a secret so tightly guarded that even pilots didn't know how it worked. Once dropped, it entered the water silently and began to circle, listening for the noise of propellers. When it heard a submarine trying to escape, it turned and followed. By the summer of 1943, Fido had rewritten the laws of underwater warfare. Pilots no longer needed to guess a submarine's position after it dived. They simply dropped the torpedo and let sound do the hunting. December 13, 1943, North Atlantic. Aboard the escort carrier USS Bogue, the crew celebrated an unbroken chain of victories. 11 confirmed kills in 6 months. But they knew the battle was far from over. Every patrol brought new dangers. Unpredictable weather, mechanical breakdowns, and the constant threat of ambush from below. That morning, radar screens glowed with another contact. 2 Avengers launched into the wind, their engines roaring off the flight deck. Within 40 minutes, they found their target, U-172, a Type 9D2 submarine commanded by Oberleutnant Zursee Karl Emmermann, one of the Kriegsmarine's most experienced captains. For 2 years, U-172 had stalked Allied convoys across the Atlantic, sinking over 25,000 tons of shipping. But now, she faced an enemy she could neither outgun nor outmaneuver. The first depth charges bracketed her dive point perfectly. When the explosions faded, she surfaced briefly, surrounded by the American destroyers George E. Badger and Clemson. For the next 11 hours, a relentless duel unfolded. The destroyers circled and pounded her with hedgehogs, depth charges, and gunfire. At last, with her pressure hull ruptured, Emmermann ordered the scuttling charges set. U-172 slipped beneath the waves at 27°03" north, 28°26" west. 71 of her crew went down. 46 were pulled from the water as prisoners of war. One of them later confessed, "We thought the ocean would hide us." Now the Americans rule even the deep. January 1944, Washington, D.C. Inside the Naval Operations Building, Admiral Ernest King reviewed the latest report from the 10th Fleet. U-boat sinkings had exceeded every projection. Convoy losses had dropped to their lowest level since 1939. For the first time, the Allies controlled every major convoy route from North America to Europe. Across the ocean, Admiral Karl Donitz stared at a very different report. His submarine fleet, once his pride, was being annihilated. More than 60% of his trained crews were gone. His new Type 9 and Type 7 boats could not match Allied radar, sonar, or aircraft. But he refused to surrender. Instead, he ordered the construction of a new generation of submarines, the Electroboot. The Type 33 would be faster underwater than on the surface, powered by advanced electric systems and streamlined hulls. But these boats would come too late. In the meantime, Donitz relied on desperation tactics. U-boats were fitted with snorkels to recharge batteries while submerged. Crews were ordered to operate in shallow coastal waters, where sonar was less effective. Yet none of it restored the initiative. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Atlantic, once ruled by the gray wolves, was now a killing ground for them. March 19, 1944, mid-Atlantic. Fog clung to the water as USS Bogue's task group patrolled west of the Azores. At 0400, radar detected a contact, small, fast-moving, bearing east. Lieutenant J.G. Louis LeBlanc launched his Avenger into the thick haze. Moments later, he spotted the faint shape of a submarine struggling on the surface. The U-boat was U-575, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Günther Heidemann, an officer with a distinguished record and the Iron Cross First Class. His crew had already endured 4 depth charge attacks in the last 12 hours. Their batteries were depleted, airfoul, morale shattered. LeBlanc's first pass dropped 2 depth charges that missed. As he climbed for another run, destroyers Haverfield and Hobson closed in. Together, they formed a lethal triangle, forcing the submarine into deeper water. At 0952, the destroyers launched a full pattern of hedgehogs. Several explosions followed, and then silence. Seconds later, a massive column of air burst from below, followed by oil and debris. U-575 had been destroyed with all 37 hands. It was the Bogue Group's 9th confirmed sinking in less than a year. The successes of the hunter-killer groups reshaped naval warfare doctrine. No longer were carriers mere convoy protectors. They were predators, wielding aircraft as long-range sonar and sword. Training schools across the United States rewrote manuals based on the experiences of men like Captain Giles Short and Captain Arnold Isbell. Every engagement, every sonar contact, every attack pattern was analyzed and refined. Anti-submarine warfare was no longer an art. It had become a science. And behind it all, unseen by most, the power of ultra-intelligence continued to guide the hunt. British cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park fed daily reports to the 10th Fleet, identifying submarine groups by call sign, location, and mission. The information was disguised in operational orders to conceal its origin, but its effect was unmistakable. Entire wolfpacks were being destroyed before they ever reached the convoys they were sent to hunt. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. As the largest amphibious invasion in history unfolded, Donitz ordered every available submarine to attack the invasion fleet. But the once feared U-boat arm could barely make contact. Of the 39 submarines dispatched, only a handful reached the English Channel. Allied destroyers, corvettes, and aircraft created a near-impenetrable wall. Within days, 11 U-boats were sunk. The rest retreated to base low on fuel, their torpedoes unused. The age of the Wolfpack was over. Still, individual commanders continued to fight with grim determination. Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke of U-515, one of Germany's most decorated aces, was hunted down by USS Guadalcanal's group in April 1944. After 13 hours of relentless attacks, his submarine was forced to the surface and destroyed. Henke, refusing to surrender, was killed in the water by gunfire. 2 months later, Guadalcanal's task group achieved the unthinkable, capturing an entire enemy submarine intact, June 4, 1944, North Atlantic. Radar operators aboard USS Chatelaine reported a contact 150 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Destroyers and Avengers closed in, dropping depth charges until the submarine surfaced in a cloud of smoke. The vessel, U-505, was abandoned by its crew, drifting helplessly. American sailors boarded her under heavy fire, cutting scuttling charges and saving the ship from sinking. Inside, they found code books, Enigma machines, and detailed patrol orders, prizes of incalculable value. The U-505 was towed to Bermuda under total secrecy. For the first time in history, the U.S. Navy had captured a German submarine at sea. The intelligence windfall crippled Dönitz's remaining operations. Every message, every movement, every tactic could now be anticipated. By the end of 1944, the Atlantic was no longer a battlefield. It was an Allied highway. Convoys sailed in daylight without fear. Supplies poured into Britain, fueling the liberation of Western Europe. The hunter-killer groups, born from desperation, had rewritten the rules of naval warfare. Their relentless pursuit of the U-boats had not only secured the Atlantic lifeline, it had marked the beginning of modern anti-submarine warfare. But even as victory seemed certain, the war beneath the waves was not yet over. Deep in the shipyards of Kiel and Bremen, a new kind of submarine was taking shape, faster, deadlier, and unlike anything the world had seen before. The next phase of the battle would not be fought in the open Atlantic, but in the shadowed depths, where the line between hunter and hunted would blur once again. October 1944, Kiel Naval Shipyard, Germany. The night air smelled of diesel oil and despair. Allied bombers had turned the shipyards of northern Germany into smoldering ruins. Yet within the underground pens, engineers worked feverishly under floodlights. Their mission, to finish the Electroboot, Germany's last hope to reclaim the seas. The new Type 20 Wind submarine represented a technological leap that could have changed the war, if only it had come sooner. With a sleek hydrodynamic hull, a snorkel for submerged diesel operation, and massive battery banks, it could remain underwater for days, traveling faster submerged than surfaced. Capable of 17 knots below the waves, it could have outrun any escort and evaded radar entirely. But the Third Reich was running out of everything: fuel, steel, trained men, even time. Production was scattered across bombed factories. Components were assembled by forced laborers in underground tunnels. Of the hundreds planned, only 2 Type 20 Wiens would ever see limited combat before Germany's surrender. For Admiral Karl Dönitz, this was no longer a war for victory. It was a war for survival. He ordered his remaining U-boats to fight to the end, calling it the second happy time. But few shared his optimism. November 1944, North Atlantic. The USS Bogue group, after nearly 2 years at sea, had become legends. Their patrol zones now stretched from the Azores to the Arctic. Each man aboard carried the fatigue of endless vigilance, yet also a quiet pride. They knew the war's outcome was no longer in doubt, but their task remained: to end the U-boat threat once and for all. At 03:20 hours on November 13th, radar detected a faint echo 70 miles east of the Azores. Lieutenant Robert Stone launched in his Avenger, climbing through low clouds. Below, a periscope wake shimmered across the dark surface. Stone's bombardier released a Fido torpedo. The sea erupted moments later. When the foam cleared, debris floated on the surface: planks, oil, and the unmistakable stench of diesel. The submarine was U-1229, recently deployed on a desperate mission to insert German agents onto the U.S. coast. It would never reach America. The days of the U-boats striking fear into the Atlantic convoys were long gone. The wolfpacks had been reduced to scattered remnants, isolated, hunted, and without coordination. January 1945, North Sea. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, veteran commander of U-96, the same boat made famous in wartime propaganda, now served as a training officer. His once proud crews were replaced by teenagers, many barely 17. Their training compressed from months to weeks. The young sailors whispered grim statistics. Fewer than 1 in 4 U-boat crews survived their first patrol. Some boats never even reached their operational zones. Yet still they sailed. U-boat bases along the French coast, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, Brest, had fallen one by one. The last survivors withdrew to Norway, Denmark, and northern Germany. There, under the crumbling remains of the Reich, Dönitz prepared his final defense. He had once commanded a fleet of over 400 submarines. Now fewer than 30 remained seaworthy. March 1945, Norwegian Sea. U-1003, commanded by Kapitän Lieutenant Werner Strubing, patrolled near the Shetland Islands. The sea was bitterly cold, visibility poor. The submarine moved under snorkel, diesels rumbling through the long night. But the Allies could now hear everything. Sonar technology, once primitive, had become razor-sharp. Destroyer escorts could track even the faintest echoes of a propeller at miles' distance. At dawn, the British frigate HMS New Glasgow made contact. For hours, she and her sister ship Byron pursued the sub, dropping depth charges in relentless patterns. Strubing tried to escape by diving deeper, but pressure crushed his hull beyond tolerance. Damaged and unable to surface safely, U-1003 struck the seabed. The crew attempted repairs in darkness, whispering prayers into the stale air. When they finally surfaced under cover of night, the frigates were waiting. Ramming was their last resort. New Glasgow struck the submarine amidships. The sea swallowed both ships in a tangle of wreckage and oil. Most of U-1003's crew went down with her. April 1945, Kiel, Germany. The end had come. Allied armies were closing in from all directions. The once proud bases of the Kriegsmarine lay in ruins, yet in the underground bunkers of the Naval High Command, Admiral Dönitz refused to yield. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler took his own life in Berlin. In his final testament, he named Dönitz as his successor, Grand Admiral and President of the Reich. Within hours, Dönitz assumed command of a nation in collapse. He ordered his remaining submarines to continue the fight, even as Germany itself crumbled. From Flensburg, he broadcast one final message to his U-boat commanders. The struggle continues until the enemy sets foot on German soil. Each of you knows what is at stake. It was a feudal order. The Atlantic had already been lost. Allied hunter-killer groups prowled every route. Aircraft covered every bay and fjord. The once proud submarine arm was dying, not from lack of courage, but from the unstoppable march of technology. May 4th, 1945. The final order. In a quiet coastal villa near Flensburg, Dönitz met with his surviving staff. The radio reports were clear. Berlin had fallen. Soviet armies occupied the capital. American and British forces were advancing across northern Germany. At 800 hours, Dönitz gave the command that ended the U-boat war. All U-boats cease fire. Surface and surrender to Allied forces. It was over. That night, across the cold waters of the Atlantic, dozens of submarines surfaced for the last time. Their diesel engines coughed to life, their crews standing silently on deck under the pale light of flares. White flags were hoisted. In harbors and at sea, sailors who had fought invisible battles for years now awaited capture. Some refused. A handful of captains chose to scuttle their vessels rather than surrender. Others attempted to flee to Argentina or Spain. But few succeeded. On May 9, 1945, the last operational U-boat, U-234, surrendered to the U.S. Navy. Her cargo shocked her captors. Advanced weapon blueprints, jet aircraft parts, and 560 kilograms of uranium oxide, intended for Japan. The submarine war had ended, but its shadow would stretch far into the future. June 1945, Portsmouth Naval Base, England. Rows of captured U-boats lay moored side by side, grim trophies of a vanished fleet. Allied engineers swarmed over them, studying every valve, periscope, and battery cell. Their discoveries would change navies forever. The Type 21's revolutionary design became the blueprint for the Cold War submarine. Within a decade, its principles evolved into the world's first nuclear-powered subs. Vessels capable of staying submerged for months, carrying weapons undreamed of in 1943. But for the men who had fought the Atlantic battle, the victory came at a terrible price. Over 30,000 German submariners had died, an 80% casualty rate, the highest of any service in World War II. The Allied merchant marine had lost more than 3,500 ships and 72,000 sailors and passengers. In the end, the sea claimed them all. Indifferent to flags or causes. Epilogue. The Silent Sea. Today, the wrecks of the U-boats rest on the ocean floor, steel tombs sealed in darkness. Their numbers stretch from the icy Barents Sea to the warm Caribbean, silent witnesses to a battle that decided the fate of nations. The hunter-killer groups Bogue, Card-Corps, Santee, and Croatan stand among the greatest unsung heroes of the Second World War. Their relentless pursuit, guided by intelligence, innovation, and sheer endurance, turned the tide of the Atlantic and secured the lifeline that made victory in Europe possible. Admiral Dönitz, imprisoned at Nuremberg, reflected years later, "The U-boat war was lost because we fought against not one enemy, but many, the scientist, the engineer, the worker, and the endless sea itself. In the end, it was not a single battle that ended the U-boat threat, but the slow, systematic evolution of warfare. From radar and sonar to cryptanalysis and air power, every tool of modern conflict had converged in one vast, unseen campaign. And as peace returned to the oceans, the last of the wolves sank into history, silent, unseen, and forever hunted.